Okay, let's unpack this. If there's one spot on our bodies that seems to just grab onto fat and refuse to let go, it's right around the middle.
It really is.
We see the ads all the time, the lose 10 pounds in 10 days promises, the endless stream of quick fixes. It's, well, it's enough to make you feel like you're fighting a losing battle sometimes.
It really can feel that way. And I think part of the frustration comes from, well, not really understanding what we're actually dealing with.
Right?
And why it's so resistant to those simple solutions people promise. There's actually a lot more going on under the surface than, most people realize.
Which is exactly what we're diving into today. We want to cut through all that noise around belly fat. Really understand why it's not just, frustrating from maybe a vanity perspective, but genuinely dangerous.
Yeah.
Why it's so stubbornly difficult to lose, and importantly, what science-backed, sustainable strategies actually work. We've pulled insights from places like the Mayo Clinic and Harvard Health to get a good handle on this.
And what's really fascinating, and something our sources highlight, is that we often talk about belly fat like it's just one thing.
Okay.
But there are actually two main types. And one of them is significantly more concerning for your health.
Ah, okay. So break that down. What are the two types?
Right. So first, there's the stuff you can literally pinch, the soft layer just under your skin.
Yeah.
That's called subcutaneous fat. It sits right on top of your abdominal muscles. And look, in moderate amounts, it's not the main health villain we need to worry about.
Okay, so that's the surface stuff. What's the other type?
The real troublemaker is what's called visceral fat. Now, this is the fat that lies deep inside your abdomen.
Deep inside.
Yes, nestled around your vital organs, your liver, your stomach, your intestines. You actually can't pinch this fat because it's tucked away deep inside the abdominal wall.
Ah, okay.
It's also stored in something called the omentum. You can kind of picture that, like an apron made of fatty tissue that hangs down under your muscles.
Oh.
And when that omentum fills up with visceral fat, it actually gets harder and thicker. Now, for most people, visceral fat might only make up maybe 10% of their total body fat.
Only 10%? That doesn't sound like much.
It doesn't, but its impact on your health is, well, disproportionately large. It's the one we really need to pay attention to.
And here's where it gets really surprising and maybe a little alarming.
Yeah.
This deep internal fat. It isn't just sitting there passively storing energy.
No, not at all. It's biologically active. That's a huge shift in how we understand fat tissue.
Biologically active, what does that mean?
It means visceral fat acts almost like its own endocrine organ.
Like a gland.
Kind of, yeah. It actively secretes hormones and other potent molecules directly into your bloodstream. And because it's located so close to the portal vein, that's the vein carrying blood straight to the liver.
Okay.
Many of these substances it releases go right to one of your body's major processing centers, the liver, which can then cause further issues.
Wow. Okay, so it's not just inert padding. It's actively pumping stuff out into our systems. What kind of stuff are we talking about?
Well, visceral fat is particularly good at producing molecules that can trigger negative effects throughout the body. For instance, it secretes higher levels of cytokines.
Cytokines. Those sound familiar. Aren't they involved in inflammation?
Exactly. You can think of them like tiny inflammatory signals. And when you have too much visceral fat pumping these out constantly, it leads to chronic low-level inflammation throughout your body.
And that chronic inflammation, that's like constant friction in your body's systems, isn't it? It's linked to all sorts of long-term health problems.
Precisely. It also releases a precursor to a substance called angiotensin.
Angiotensin, what does that do?
Well, this protein plays a key role in constricting blood vessels, narrowing them.
Which means it's actively working to raise your blood pressure.
Exactly. So just picture this. You have this internal fat deep inside, silently driving up inflammation and tightening your blood vessels, among other things it's doing.
That paints a pretty clear picture of why it's so dangerous. So what does this actually mean for your health in the long run? What are the big risks?
The health consequences linked to carrying too much visceral fat are, well, they're extensive. It's strongly associated with high blood pressure, for one.
Okay.
And unhealthy blood lipid levels, things like high triglycerides, which is fat in the blood, and lower levels of that beneficial HDL cholesterol, the good kind.
Right.
It's also a significant risk factor for sleep apnea.
And what about the heart? That seems like an obvious connection.
Absolutely. The impact on cardiovascular health is major. Our sources highlight a nearly doubled risk of heart disease, even when you account for other factors like smoking or overall weight.
Doubled. Wow.
Yeah, and one piece of research we saw was quite specific. It noted that in otherwise healthy, non-smoking women, every 2 inches added to their waist size raise their risk of cardiovascular disease by 10%.
10% for every 2 inches.
Yeah.
That's a very direct and frankly scary link.
It absolutely is. And the metabolic effects are profound too. Visceral fat is a major contributor to insulin resistance.
Meaning your body doesn't respond well to insulin anymore.
Exactly. Which drives up blood sugar levels and significantly increases the risk of developing type 2 diabetes.
And when you put high blood pressure, unhealthy fats in the blood, and high blood sugar together, isn't that metabolic syndrome?
That's exactly metabolic syndrome. It's a cluster of these dangerous risk factors that dramatically raises your likelihood of having a heart attack, stroke, and diabetes.
So it's a perfect storm, really. Are there other risks?
The risks extend even further, unfortunately. Studies link higher visceral fat levels to an increased risk for certain types of cancer,
Cancers, like which ones?
including colorectal cancer. One study found the risk of precancerous polyps was 3 times higher in those with the most abdominal fat. And also breast cancer, particularly before menopause.
Wow.
There's also a strong link to fatty liver disease, stroke, and, quite sobering, an increased risk of early death from any cause.
Okay, this is serious stuff. It's not just about looks at all.
Not even close. And some of the newer research is connecting it to areas you might not immediately think of, like brain health.
Brain health. How?
Well, one study found that individuals in their 40s who had the most abdominal fat were nearly 3 times more likely to develop dementia later in life, including Alzheimer's disease, compared to those with the least amount of belly fat.
3 times the risk of dementia. That's staggering.
It really is. And even respiratory issues like asthma seem to be linked. Women with high visceral fat, defined in one study as having over a 35-inch waist, had a 37% higher likelihood of developing asthma.
Even if they weren't generally overweight.
Exactly, even if their overall weight was considered normal. The thinking is it might be related to those systemic inflammatory effects we talked about.
So this deep fat is truly impacting systems all over the body, from your heart and metabolism to your brain and even your lungs.
Precisely. It really underscores why addressing this is fundamental to long-term health.
Okay, so it's abundantly clear now why we need to pay attention to this. But if it's so problematic, why do some people seem to pile it on more than others? And why is it so notoriously difficult to get rid of?
Well, the fundamental equation, the basic physics of it, is always calories consumed versus calories burned.
Energy in, energy out.
Right. If you consistently eat more energy, more calories than your body uses, you will gain weight. And some of that weight gain will inevitably be stored as fat, including belly fat.
That makes sense, the basic balance, but it feels like there's got to be more to it than just the calorie count, right? Because some people seem to store it right there in the middle more easily.
Oh, there definitely is more to it. Age is a really significant factor.
How so?
As we get older, we naturally tend to lose muscle mass, especially if we're not actively working to maintain it through strength training.
Okay.
And since muscle burns more calories at rest than fat does, losing muscle actually slows down our metabolism. Our furnace doesn't run as hot.
Yeah. So even if you eat the same, you might gain weight easier.
Exactly. Your calorie needs decrease over time. For example, a man in his 50s might need around 200 fewer calories per day than he did in his 30s just to maintain the same weight. If he doesn't adjust his intake or increase activity, the excess tends to accumulate, often around the middle.
And what about genetics? Does that play a role? You hear people say, oh, it runs in my family.
Absolutely. Your genes can definitely influence both your overall tendency towards gaining weight and where your body prefers to deposit that fat. Some people are just genetically more predisposed to storing it in their abdomen.
Hormones, too, I imagine, especially for women.
Yes, hormonal shifts play a big part. Changes like menopause in women often lead to a shift in fat storage patterns away from the hips and thighs, where it might have accumulated earlier in life, and more towards the abdomen, favoring that visceral fat storage.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about the classic beer belly? Is that really a thing or just a stereotype?
Well, it's not just beer, but it's not entirely off base either. Excessive alcohol consumption contributes a lot of empty calories. Calories with little nutritional value, which the body easily stores as fat.
Right.
And some research specifically links higher alcohol intake to increased visceral fat accumulation. So cutting back on alcohol helps reduce both the overall calorie intake and potentially that specific tendency for belly fat.
So moderation is key there. What about stress and lack of sleep? I feel like I hear those mentioned a lot in connection with weight, especially around the middle.
They're huge factors and often seriously underestimated. Chronic stress keeps levels of the hormone cortisol elevated.
Cortisol. the stress hormone.
Exactly. And cortisol is notorious for signaling your body to store fat. And specifically, it seems to promote visceral fat storage.
Ah, so stress directly encourages this dangerous deep fat.
It appears so. And poor sleep is like a double whammy. First, lack of sleep disrupts ghrelin and leptin. Those are the hormones that regulate your hunger and fullness signals.
So you feel hungrier and less satisfied.
Right. Precisely. Often leading to increased cravings for less healthy, calorie-dense foods, which contributes to weight gain. And lack of sleep also increases cortisol levels.
So you get the stress hormone effect too. Wow.
Yeah. And interestingly, studies in adults under 40 have found links between accumulating more visceral fat and not just getting too little sleep, like less than 5 hours, but also getting too much sleep, like more than 8 hours.
That's fascinating about the too much sleep link in younger adults. Anything else? Any other less obvious culprits?
Smoking is another factor. Smokers tend to store fat more in the abdomen compared to the hips and thighs.
Okay.
There's also some research suggesting a potential link between having a lower birth weight and maybe accumulating more abdominal fat later in life, and also that women who have given birth may, on average, develop more visceral fat than women who haven't.
So it really is a complex mix: genetics, hormones, lifestyle choices like diet and exercise, stress, sleep, even things like smoking and maybe early life factors.
Exactly. It's rarely just one single thing.
Okay. Before we get into the solutions, because I know everyone wants to hear those words, how can someone listening right now get a rough idea, just a simple check at home, if they might have concerning levels of this deep belly fat, since you can't pinch it?
That's a great question. The best practical tool you have at home is actually just a simple tape measure.
Okay.
Measuring your waist circumference is a surprisingly good indicator of how much visceral fat you're likely carrying, even though it's obviously not as precise as, say, a CT scan or MRI.
Right, but it's accessible, so how do you make sure you're doing it correctly? I can imagine it's easy to get a misleading number if you don't do it right.
Absolutely. Consistency is key. You want to be standing up straight, preferably with a bare stomach or maybe over thin clothing. Find the top of your hip bone. You can feel it on the side. It's called the iliac crest.
Okay, the top bony part of the hip.
Right. Place the tape measure just above this bone, wrapping it around your body. Another common instruction you might see is to measure at the level of your navel, your belly button. The most important thing is to pick a spot and measure in the same spot each time you check.
Got it. Consistent location. And how tight should the tape be?
It should be snug, but not digging into your skin. Make sure the tape is level all the way around, parallel to the floor.
Okay.
And then, the crucial part, relax. Take a normal breath out, exhale, and then take the measurement. Don't suck in your stomach.
Right, no cheating. Okay, so measure after breathing out, tape level, just above the hip bone or at the navel. What are the numbers we should be aware of? What signals potential concern?
For men, generally a waist circumference of more than 40 inches, or about 102 centimeters, is considered a sign of an unhealthy amount of visceral fat and significantly increased health risks.
Okay, over 40 inches for men. What about for women?
For women, that threshold is typically 35 inches, or about 88 centimeters. Now, it's important to add a little context here.
Yeah.
If you're a larger person overall, maybe taller or with a larger frame, a 35-inch waist might not carry the exact same level of risk in isolation as it would for someone smaller. The most important thing, really, is to watch the trend.
Ah, so not just the absolute number, but whether it's increasing.
Exactly. Is your waist size growing relative to your overall body size?
Mm.
But generally speaking, yes, a larger waist measurement usually correlates with higher health risks across the board. Above those thresholds of 40 for men and 35 for women is definitely a flag to pay attention.
Okay, so check the number as a snapshot, but also maybe track it over time to see the direction it's moving. Right. Now let's get to the part everyone's probably waiting for, the strategies. How do we actually shrink this dangerous belly fat? What works?
Okay, so here's the genuinely good news. Visceral fat, despite being dangerous, is actually surprisingly responsive to positive changes in diet and exercise.
Really? More so than the subcutaneous kind?
Often, yes. It seems to be one of the first types of fat the body taps into for energy when you start creating a calorie deficit through healthy eating and activity.
That is good news. But what about all those ab gadgets and exercises? Can you target just the belly?
The million-dollar question. The key thing to understand and accept is that you absolutely cannot spot reduce belly fat or fat from any specific area with targeted exercises.
So all those crunches.
Doing hundreds of crunches or sit-ups will definitely strengthen the abdominal muscles under the fat layer. That's good for core strength and stability. but it won't magically burn off the fat layer that's sitting on top.
Okay, that's crucial. So achieving a leaner midsection isn't about targeting the abs directly. It's about overall fat loss.
Exactly. It requires a comprehensive, consistent approach that reduces your total body fat. And that's why quick fixes or things like liposuction don't really solve the visceral fat problem. Liposuction removes subcutaneous fat that doesn't reach that deep, dangerous fat around your organs.
Okay, so no magic bullets. It's about a holistic strategy for overall health improvements. Let's start with what we put into our bodies. Nutrition seems foundational.
Nutrition is absolutely foundational. The main focus needs to be on adopting a healthy eating pattern that supports overall healthy weight management, not some crash diet.
So what does that look like?
It generally means prioritizing whole, minimally processed foods. Lots of plant-based foods, fruits, vegetables, whole grains like oats, quinoa, brown rice. These are packed with nutrients and fiber.
And protein.
Yes, choose lean protein sources, things like fish, poultry without the skin, beans and lentils, low-fat dairy if you consume it.
Okay. And what should we be trying to minimize or avoid?
Definitely limit processed meats like sausages and deli meat. Also, cut back on saturated fats, which are found in higher amounts in red meat, butter, and full-fat dairy products.
What about healthy fats?
Good fats are important. Choose moderate amounts of monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats. You find those in things like fish, especially fatty fish like salmon, nuts, seeds, olive oil, and avocados.
Yeah.
And definitely avoid artificial trans fats, often found in processed baked goods and fried foods. Check labels for partially hydrogenated oils.
And sugar, you mentioned that earlier.
Yes, be really mindful of added sugars, especially simple sugars like high fructose corn syrup, which are often hidden in processed foods, sauces, and particularly sugary drinks like sodas, sweetened teas, and juices. These seem quite strongly linked to visceral fat accumulation.
So replacing sugary drinks with water, or maybe unsweetened tea or coffee, is a simple but powerful step.
Huge impact, yeah. And portion size still matters, right? Even with healthy foods. Absolutely. Calories are still the currency of energy balance. Be conscious of your portion sizes. Maybe use smaller plates at home. When eating out, restaurants often serve massive portions. So consider sharing an entree or planning right away to take half of it home for another meal.
Learning to listen to your body's hunger and fullness cues seems important too.
Very much so. Eating mindfully, paying attention to when you're truly hungry, and stopping when you're satisfied, not stuffed. And you mentioned fiber earlier. That plays a role here too.
Yes, fiber is key, particularly soluble fiber.
Where do we find that? You find soluble fiber in foods like oats, barley, beans, peas, apples, citrus fruits, carrots, and flaxseed. It dissolves in water to form a gel-like substance in your gut.
And how does that help with belly fat?
Well, it helps you feel fuller for longer, which can naturally help you manage your calorie intake. Plus, it slows down digestion and the absorption of sugar, helping with blood sugar control.
And there's growing evidence that soluble fiber supports a healthy gut microbiome, which also seems to play a role in regulating body fat distribution, including visceral fat.
Okay, so focus on whole foods, lean protein, healthy fats, lots of fiber, limit sugar and processed stuff, and watch portions. That's a solid nutrition plan. Now, what about exercise? You said crunches alone won't cut it. What should we be doing?
Exercise is absolutely non-negotiable for tackling visceral fat, and you really need a well-rounded routine. It's not just about cardio or just about strength.
Okay, so what's the cardio recommendation?
The general guidelines recommend aiming for at least 150 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic activity per week.
What counts as moderate intent? Think brisk walking, where you can talk but maybe not sing easily. Casual cycling, water aerobics, dancing, things that get your heart rate up but aren't all-out sprints.
Okay, 150 minutes a week. Or is there an option for more intense exercise?
Yes. Alternatively, you could aim for at least 75 minutes per week of vigorous intensity aerobic activity.
A vigorous is.
Things like jogging or running, swimming laps, cycling faster or uphill, playing singles tennis. Activities where you're breathing hard and fast and can only say a few words without pausing for breath. Or, of course, you can do a combination of moderate and vigorous activity.
Got it. So aerobic exercise is key. What about strength training? You mentioned muscle loss earlier.
Strength training is absolutely essential, ideally hitting all major muscle groups at least twice a week.
Why is it so important for belly fat specifically?
Because building and maintaining muscle mass is crucial for your metabolism. Muscle tissue is metabolically active. It burns more calories at rest than fat tissue does. So the more muscle you have, the higher your resting metabolic rate, which means you burn more calories throughout the day, even when you're not exercising. This contributes significantly to overall fat loss, which includes that visceral fat.
So it helps create that calorie deficit needed to burn fat. What kind of strength exercises are best?
Focus on compound movements. These are exercises that work multiple large muscle groups at the same time. Think squats, deadlifts, lunges, push-ups, bench presses, overhead presses, rows. They give you the most bang for your buck in terms of muscle building and calorie burning.
Okay, compound lifts, twice a week. What about those high-intensity interval training workouts, HIIT? I hear a lot about those being good for fat loss.
Yes, HIIT can be particularly effective, and some studies suggest it might be especially good for targeting visceral fat.
How does HIIT work?
It involves short bursts of very intense exercise, going almost all out, followed by brief recovery periods. This approach creates a significant metabolic disturbance, leading to what's called the afterburn effect, or EFE, excess post-exercise oxygen consumption.
Meaning you keep burning calories after the workout.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Your body continues to burn calories at an elevated rate for hours after you finish a HIIT session, as it works to recover. It can be a very time-efficient way to boost fat burning.
So maybe incorporating some HIIT sessions alongside regular cardio and strength work could be beneficial. Now back to the core itself. If crunches aren't the answer for fat loss, should we still train our abs?
Absolutely. Having a strong core is vital for functional strength, stability, posture, and preventing back pain. But instead of endless crunches focusing just on the six-pack muscles, think about exercises that work your entire core musculature in the way you use it in daily life.
Like what?
Things like planks and side planks, bird dogs, dead bugs, Palloff presses. These exercises challenge your core to stabilize your spine against movement, which is its primary job. They build functional strength underneath the fat layer.
Okay, so core stability work is important for function, but the overall fat loss comes from the cardio, strength training, and diet.
Precisely. And consistency with all forms of exercise is key. Regular activity not only helps you lose visceral fat, but also helps prevent it from coming back. And importantly, exercise can reduce visceral fat and build muscle mass even if the number on the scale doesn't change dramatically at first. You're making positive changes internally.
That's a really important point. Don't just focus on the scale. And finding ways to just add more simple movement into your day helps too, right? Like taking the stairs, parking farther away.
Definitely. All those little bits of activity add up. It's about creating a more active lifestyle overall, contributing to that calorie balance.
Okay, so we've covered nutrition and exercise comprehensively. What about those lifestyle factors we touched on earlier? Stress, sleep. They seem crucial for making this all work long term.
They absolutely are. You can have the best diet and exercise plan, but if you're chronically stressed and sleep deprived, it's going to undermine your efforts, partly because of that cortisol connection we discussed.
So actively managing stress is part of the belly fat strategy.
Yes. Finding effective, healthy ways to manage chronic stress is really important. This will look different for everyone, but it could involve things like meditation, yoga, spending time in nature, deep breathing exercises, engaging in hobbies you enjoy, listening to music, connecting with friends, whatever helps you unwind and lower those cortisol levels.
And making quality sleep a non-negotiable priority.
Crucial. Aiming for that sweet spot of 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep per night for most adults helps balance those hunger hormones, ghrelin and leptin, making it easier to manage appetite and cravings. And it helps keep cortisol levels in check, too. Good sleep hygiene, like having a consistent sleep schedule, a cool, dark room, avoiding screens before bed can make a big difference.
And limiting alcohol is part of this picture too, as we mentioned.
Yes, drinking only in moderation, if at all. It reduces those empty calories and seems to lessen the tendency for visceral fat specifically to build up. Current guidelines often suggest up to 1 drink per day for women and up to 2 drinks per day for men, maximum.
And definitely not smoking.
Right. Since smoking is linked to storing fat more readily in the abdomen, quitting smoking or obviously never starting removes one significant factor that promotes that dangerous fat distribution.
So it really is a multi-pronged attack, isn't it? Diet, exercise, stress, sleep, alcohol, smoking, they all play a role.
It's a truly holistic approach.
Okay, so to kind of wrap this deep dive up, the big takeaway seems to be that tackling belly fat, especially that dangerous visceral fat, isn't about finding some magic pill or doing endless crunches targeting your abs.
Not at all. It's about first recognizing that visceral fat isn't just passive padding. It's a dangerous biologically active organ that's profoundly impacting your health from the inside out.
And then understanding that successfully reducing it requires a sustained, comprehensive strategy. It's not about quick fixes.
Exactly. It's about consistently fueling your body with nutrient-dense whole foods. challenging it regularly with a smart mix of cardio and strength training, and crucially, supporting all of that by managing stress, prioritizing quality sleep, limiting alcohol, and avoiding smoking.
It definitely takes effort, and it requires patience. Aiming for slow, steady progress, maybe losing 1 pounds a week if weight loss is the goal, is always going to be more sustainable and healthier than trying to crash diet or chase rapid results.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But by focusing on this holistic strategy, you're doing so much more than just working towards a smaller waistline. You're actively reducing your risk of really serious health problems like heart disease, diabetes, and even dementia. You're investing in your long-term well-being and vibrancy.
And that truly is the most valuable outcome, isn't it? Health from the inside out.
Couldn't agree more.
So thinking about everything we've discussed, given that this visceral fat is so biologically active, almost like that hidden endocrine organ influencing your health in such profound ways, maybe the question for you listening is, what's just one small actionable shift you can realistically make starting today? Maybe it's in your diet, maybe adding a short walk to your routine, maybe committing to an earlier bedtime, or trying a 5-minute stress reduction exercise. Just one small thing that acknowledges the active role of this inner fat and starts working towards a healthier you from the inside out. Something to consider until our next deep dive.